the Arcane Mage, and that's what we're going to be visiting today. As you can see, there's a lot of similar gameplay to what you would normally see on live, but the way that this thing is playing out currently, it starts getting boring after a while, unfortunately, because you aren't managing the mana like you used to. Unfortunately, at first when I saw in the alpha that they had taken this restriction away and changed your mastery, I really thought that this was going to make for a better gameplay and you're going to have a little more nuke downtime and so on and so forth, but it really limits how you want to play. But it does take away that differentiate. The real easiest way I can say this is they've simplified it and they've made it to where you can actually have an oopsie and still end up doing great damage. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the abilities. So here we are taking a look at the Arcane Mage spells, and starting off, we're going to look at Arcane Barrage. It's fairly low mana cost, 4-second cooldown reduced by haste, and it launches a bolt of arcane energy at the enemy, or at the target enemy, causing very little arcane damage up front. Damage is increased by 74% per arcane charge, which will be adjusted by your mastery and how much you actually have, and it hits one additional target within 10 yards per arcane charge for 50% damage. 4 charges, it'll hit a total of 5 targets. Pretty decent on an AoE situation, but other than that, it's just mainly going to be used to clear out your arcane charges just like before. Arcane Blast. Blast the target with energy, dealing very minimal arcane damage up front, and the damage is increased per arcane charge. Mana cost increased by 100% per arcane charge though. Gets pretty expensive pretty quick. Generates 1 arcane charge per cast. Arcane Explosion. This is your base AoE. As you can see, that's all it's going to do. But each time it hits a target, it's going to generate a charge of arcane charge. Its damage is increased by 74% per arcane charge, and the mana cost is also increased. Arcane Familiar is actually talent. We'll go over that later. Arcane Missiles. Hey, these work exactly the same. Launches 5 waves of arcane missiles at the enemy over 1.8 seconds, dealing a total of 48,965 damage. Pretty decent damage, and especially once you're at 4 charges. Each damaging spell cast has a 15% chance to activate arcane missiles, chance double for Arcane Blast. Basically, if you're using Arcane Blast, this is going to be your main generator. 30% chance to actually increase, or 30% chance of actually getting arcane missiles with this. Arcane Blast, still no effect change. It looks almost exactly the same, but you can see missiles. And there you have it. That's an Arcane Missiles. A little bit tighter on the actual graphics model, but not too great. Arcane Power, still going to be your main CD. 1.5 minute cooldown. For 12 seconds, you deal 30% more spell damage, and your spells cost 30% less mana. This is great for heavy Arcane Blast nuke phases to end up helping you out. Blink. It's instant, teleports you forward for 20 yards or until reaching an obstacle. Works the same as what's on live, 15-second cooldown. Conjure Refreshments does exactly that. You get to make food. That's the only bad part though, no table. You got to make it individually now. Counterspell. It's instant, 24-second cooldown. Counters the enemy spell cast, preventing any spell from that school or magic from being cast for 6 seconds. Just a basic interrupt, 24-second cooldown. Displacement. This is kind of interesting. So basically, it teleports you back to where you last blinked from and resets cooldown on blink. Only usable within 10 seconds of blinking. So what we're going to look at, I'm going to blink real quick. Okay, and now I'm running around. Now I'm going to go ahead and use displacement, and it's going to pull you right back to the same area and reset blink. It's got a 30-second cooldown, but this has had its major efforts put in for kiting reasons, because this spec you don't want to actually stand there and get beat on. You will end up getting totally wrecked in most situations if you let it just sit there and beat on you. So kiting is a great deal. You still do have slow, and this displacement actually helps for whenever you get out of the way. You can still use it to actually kind of juke, and works really nice, guys. Very interesting investment. Evocation returns 100% of your total mana over 5.3 seconds, 1.5 minute cooldown. Works the same as what's on live, guys. It's going to give you a ton of mana back. Frost Nova, again, it's going to just cause you to Frost Nova, and then it'll normally end up snaring the targets in place or freezing them in place after doing a very minimal amount of damage for 8 seconds. Damage may interrupt the freeze effect. This is basically the same thing as what's on live, and again, this is going to help you out quite a bit in the open world while questing to end up locking targets down and kiting them around. Greater invisibility, 2-minute cooldown, makes you invisible and untargetable for 20 seconds, removing all threat. Any action taken cancels this effect. You take 60% reduced damage while invisible and for 3 seconds after reappearing. So they took and actually made greater invisibility baseline instead of just a talent, to where you get the excess damage reduction. Really a nice piece to add in there. And there's, to break combat and break out now, it's kind of pointless in a dungeon or raid group, considering the only people that have a mass res or a res are going to be healers or the normal classes that have single target reses. So really, if you break combat, you're just doing it to save your own ass in that aspect. But as a defensive cooldown, this thing works absolutely amazing on heavier AoE damaging abilities. I noticed in Eye of Ashara, the big giant dude, he throws the bubbles out. There was a situation where I saw 2 of the DPS that were just tunneling the boss, and they weren't actually end up taking the damage to break the shield, that they ended up getting ready to blow up, and I used greater invisibility. I was the only one that survived out of the situation, except for the tank. It was pretty interesting, and needless to say, they learned their lesson because we killed it on the next try. But it does help out. Ice Barrier, instant 25-second cooldown, shields you for 1 minute, absorbing a decent amount of damage while the shield holds. Spellcasting will not be interrupted by damage. This shield is still works the same, to where the more spell power you have, the higher the damage absorption is going to be, and on a 25-second cooldown, it works pretty damn well. Ice Block, 5-minute recharge, encases you in a block of ice, protecting you from all attacks and damage for 10 seconds, but during the time, you cannot attack, move, or cast spells. Causes hypothermia, preventing you from recasting Ice Block for 30 seconds. There's a talent that actually ends up healing you while you're in this, and they don't want you to abuse it, so that's why the hypothermia part's in there. But you can end up surviving and saving your ass with Ice Block here also. Ice Flows is a talent, we'll go over that later. Mirror Images is a talent, we'll go over that later. Polymorph Sheep, hey, Polymorph is Polymorph. It's the same thing as what's on live. It's a 50-second CC that's going to turn them into a sheep, but they will regenerate the health real quickly whenever you use it. So make sure you're not casting it on something that's about to die. Only works on beast humanoids and critters. Portal, the only 2 we got unlocked right now are Silvermoon and Ogremar. Sure, it's trained the same way, but I haven't gone looking for a trainer. You've got Slow, reduces the target's movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. Slow Fall, slows a group member's falling speed for 30 seconds. Spell Steal, steals a beneficial magic effect from the target. This effect lasts a maximum of 2 minutes. They really want you to end up using this thing. There's a lot of things that you can actually use Spell Steal on now. Supernova is a talent. We'll go over that later. Teleport, same thing as portals, but you do end up getting Teleport Hall of the Guardian, which actually ends up getting you into your class Order Hall. Time Warp's still there. This is basically the Bloodlust for mages. Works out great. Gives you 30% additional haste for all party and raid members for 40 seconds. But it does end up making it to where you can no longer cast it for 10 minutes and for Bloodlust, Heroism, or Time Warp. Mage Armor is your passive armor for this spec. Increases your mastery by 470. The duration of all harmful magic effects against you is reduced by 25%. And then your new mastery, Savant, passive, increases your mana regeneration rate and maximum mana by 29.8%. Arcane charges increase the damage of affected spells by an additional 14.89%, or wherever it ends up lying. With this, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the talents. And here we are looking at the talents. Level 15, you've got the Arcane Familiar. It's instant on a 1-minute cooldown, and you summon a familiar that attacks your enemies and increases your maximum mana by 10%. This fits in pretty decent with the whole new mastery, helps out quite a bit. But as you can see, here it is, the little arcane familiar. And I'm just going to attack this real quick to see if it'll end up attacking with me. And you'll see every now and then it'll actually do like a little barrage. There it goes. And that's it. That's all it's going to end up doing, is occasionally casting that barrage towards the target. As you can see, the effect really doesn't line up with it too much, but it does end up doing some decent damage. Presence of Mind has had a huge change. Instant, 1 minute cooldown, causes your next 2 arcane blasts to be instant. This adds some really interesting flavor in, and it lines up well with actually using arcane power. Then you've got Words of Power, which is going to be your best bet at getting an old school arcane back. It grants 1% increased chance to trigger arcane missiles per 20% of your mana you have unspent. So you can get an increased amount of arcane missiles if you end up managing your mana correctly. This is going to be a benefit in that factor if that's the way you want to end up going with it, and it plays out fairly well. Even though most of the time it's only going to be 4 additional percent, it's still real nice to end up seeing. Level 30, you have Shimmer. It replaces Blink. It's 15-second recharge because you actually get 2 charges of this right off the bat. It teleports you 20 yards forward unless something is in the way. Unaffected by the global cooldown and castable while casting. Really, it's a decent mobility factor if you need it. I didn't notice a lot of areas where I couldn't just sidestep or use ice flows and cast as I was moving. Cauterize, passive. Fatal damage instead brings you to 35% health and then burns you for 28% of your maximum health over 6 seconds. While burning, movement slowing effects are suppressed and your movement speed is increased by 150%. This effect cannot occur more than once every 2 minutes. Basically, this is a last stand kind of deal. If you end up taking fatal damage, you are not going to die. It will help you out as long as you end up getting some heals afterwards. And then you also have the movement effect of, I believe it was Burning Rush that they had before. I can't remember if that's it or if that's the Warlock one. But you did have a speed increase talent that was mixed in, and now they just kind of clashed them together into Cauterize. And then you have Cold Snap. It's passive. Ice Block now has 2 charges and also heals you for 3% of your maximum health every 1 second. You can basically get 30% of your health back whenever you use Ice Block. And this did end up helping a little bit on the questing side, and that's one of the reasons why I have it more than anything else. Level 45, Mirror Images. Create 3 copies of your nearby... Create 3 copies of you nearby, which cast spells and attack your enemies. Last 40 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. So roughly, you can keep this up a pretty decent amount of time. You're looking at 40 seconds uptime with, 120 seconds total. So you're looking at, 80 seconds. So 1/3 of the time you can keep mirror images up. Last pretty decent, and they do some really damn good damage. You also have Rune of Power in this tier. This is going to be by far one of your better tiers of increasing power. Now, Rune of Power, it's a 45-second recharge, places a rune on the ground for 10 seconds, which increases your spell damage by 50% while you stand within 8 yards. It looks basically the same. And what you are looking at, it's still got me in combat. Let me see if I can break this real quick. I may have to, let me get rid of the familiar. That's probably what's got me in combat still. So, Rune of Power, still in combat. Alright, give it a second. But anyways, it's going to drop the same rune underneath you. It just doesn't last as long, and it's going to be more tied as a cooldown. You do get 2 charges of this, thus the 45-second recharge, but it does have a 1.32 second cast. You can line this up with your Arcane Power quite nicely, and it plays out very well in a burst situation. You can get some insane bursts done off of this ability, and you can also end up mixing it to where you use your second charge whenever you've got, a good amount of arcane missiles and you're fully loaded on your arcane charges, and just do some pretty high burst damage off of it. Plays very nice if you like that playstyle. In Canter's Flow, magical energy flows through you while in combat, building up to 20% increased damage and then diminishing down to 4% increased damage, cycling every 10 seconds. This works out pretty nice. Also, again, this is going to be a timing deal of when you're going to want to actually use your arcane missiles and get the extra benefit out, because arcane missiles is basically your main damaging ability, where you can get the most benefit if you are getting the procs. Level 60, Supernova, instant, 25-second cooldown, pulses arcane energy around the target enemy or ally, dealing 20,000 arcane damage to all enemies within 8 yards and knocking them upward. A primary enemy target will take 100% increased damage. It's a decent amount of increased damage. Charged up, instant, 30-second cooldown, immediately grants 4 charges of arcane charges. And this is decent if you're looking at getting back into that full stack situation, but I noticed most of the time I didn't have too much of an issue of being up there to begin with. Obviously it's 4 casts before you get up there, but really you spend a lot of time fully charged and you're actually looking at, you know, getting rid of those charges more than anything else while maintaining a huge amount of damage. Resonance, passive, Arcane Barrage deals 25% increased damage per target it hits. This is going to be more of an AoE ability. Ice Flows. Oh, Ice Flows. Love this thing. 3 charges baseline. Makes your next mage spell with a cast time shorter than 10 seconds, castable while moving, unaffected by the global cooldown, and castable while casting. Maximum of 3 charges. 20 seconds per recharge. This is great for mobility reasons because you can end up casting Ice Flows in the middle of a cast and just move right on out of whatever was trying to kill you in the first place. So if you have something underneath you, just hit Ice Flows and proceed to moving and continuing on with your cast. Doesn't matter if it's channeled, doesn't matter if it's a, you know, regular arcane blast, or if it's a magic missiles, it's going to let you move out of there. Ring of Frost. Summons a Ring of Frost for 10 seconds at the target location. Enemies entering the ring are incapacitated for 10 seconds. Limit 10 targets. Works generally the same as what's on live. Not a whole lot going on there. Ice Ward, passive. Frost Nova now has 2 charges. Okay, nothing big on that either. Just more, you know, stopping things from attacking you. Level 90, Nether Tempest. Places a Nether Tempest on the target, which deals 8,802 damage, real low arcane damage over 12 seconds to the target, and an additional damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Limit 1 target. Damage increased by 74% per arcane charge. So what you're looking at is building up your arcane charges and then using this, and it's going to do some really good AoE. Unstable Magic. Passive. Arcane Blast has a 15% chance to explode on impact, dealing 50% additional damage to the target and all other enemies within 8 yards. A little bit more AoE on that also. And then Erosion. This had a little bit of a flair to it. Passive. Your attacks erode the target's resistance, increasing all damage a target takes from your spells by 1%, stacking up to 8 times. After 3 seconds of not taking damage from your spells, this effect decreases by 1% every 1 second. So as long as you're maintaining casting on this thing, doesn't matter what your spells are, as long as you're maintaining casting on this target, you'll see that it'll build up charges. And let me go ahead and just, we'll throw it out there. Here you go. And there it is. And then I don't believe I had Mark of Aluneth, which was the actual ability from your artifact worked in. But the spell effect on it works real nice, and each one of its ticks will actually end up building a stack also. And you can kind of see the prism that's on it, and then after it gets done, it explodes for heavier damage. I'll go over that more when we hit the actual artifact, but for some reason it wasn't in the actual spellbook. Overpowered, passive. Casting arcane missiles extends arcane power by 2 seconds, so you can end up getting some interesting gameplay with that. Quickening, passive. Arcane Blast, Arcane Missiles, and Arcane Explosion also grant 2% haste for 6 seconds, stacking up to 100 times. This effect is cleared when you cast Arcane Barrage, so this is a good way of getting some faster cast times. If you get some insane amount of mastery going on to where you're regenning real quick, this is going to help out a lot in a further progressive area. But with it being low, you're not going to regen enough to actually make this to where it works that great. But the mastery feels pretty good. I played around with it for a bit, and it does feel nice getting that extra haste. But if you go solid mastery, this is going to probably be a better way to end up going. And then you have Arcane Orb, obviously AoE, but it launches an Arcane Orb forward from your position, traveling up to 40 yards, dealing very low arcane damage to enemies it passes. passes through. Grants 1 arcane charge when cast and every time it deals damage. Basically, you're going to launch this thing forward, and then you're going to be able to barrage right off the bat to end up keeping a lot of additional... here, we'll go ahead and throw it out there so you can see it, and there it is, and that's all it does. It just does the initial damage and gets everything up, but as you can see, since I wasn't in combat, it didn't give me any additional charges. Really a different kind of setup, 15-second cooldown, but it does allow for higher AoE situations to where you can just kind of cast it off and then hit a barrage right off the bat to end up getting some good solid AoE. But Arcane Explosion hits pretty damn well also. Just something to play with. And with this, guys, let's go ahead and take a look at the artifact. So we're taking a look at Aluneth's skins. And one thing I do want to mention is this thing is a smartass. It will actually end up giving you crap and talking crap to you as you go because it hates being wielded by anyone. Very interesting lore with this staff, and it's very pissy. So if you do end up going arcane, you'll see what I'm talking about, because this thing will literally talk trash to you as you do stuff. You'll cast invisibility and it'll say, ha ha ha, I see how your true form is trying to hide, or some shit like that, and it's pretty damn funny. So we're looking at the different skins, and the base model is pretty interesting. I do enjoy it. This is actually kind of the model of what the mark of Aluneth ends up doing, which is the little entrapped prison marking that it puts. And it plays out real interesting with the spec. So next one's going to be Guardian Spire. This is a mix between one of the older BC staffs and something completely new with all this crap spinning around. It looks really good though. I like it. You've got the 3 balls on the end, which is what reminds me a lot of... Oh, I can't even think of the name of the staff, but it was a BC staff, and it looked really cool. And then you got Magna Unleashed. Interesting. Lots of lightning. It feels more, I don't know, it seems more monk to me with this one and the lightning going, and it's not so much of a mage-looking staff as the other ones are. And then Egwin's Fall, your PvP ones. Really good looking, and excuse me again, guys, I'm having some issues here. But it looks nice. We'll let it spin around so you can get another look. And there it is. The PvP one looks really damn good also. It's kind of got more of a warlock feel, but I think the way the PvP look might end up being, it may fit just fine. And with this, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the traits. Alright, so here we are looking at the artifact, and what do we have? Again, Mark of Aluneth is going to be your artifact ability. It's a 1.76 second cast, 1 minute cooldown. I didn't go over this in the abilities because it's actually under the general tab instead of the actual spell tab for some reason. Very odd, but I did end up finding it in there. And what it's going to do is create a rune around the target, inflicting a decent amount of arcane damage over 6 seconds, and then detonating for arcane damage equal to 15% of your maximum mana. This is going to be massively increased by your mastery, as your mastery increases the amount of mana you actually end up getting. As you can see, I have more mana than I do health. Works out pretty nice. And then Might of the Guardians. Very first thing you get as you walk out the door with this, and it's going to increase your arcane damage dealt by 5%. Awesome. We'll look at Blasting Rod. Rank 1 of 3 currently, but it'll end up maxing out to 3 of 3, and what's it going to do? It's going to increase damage dealt by Arcane Blast by 2, 4, or 6%. Then there's Egwin's Imperative, normally going to be a 0 of 3, increases duration of arcane power by 2, 4, or 6%, 2, 4, or 6 seconds. Mana Shield, passive, increases damage absorbed by Ice Barrier by 33%. That's going to be 33, 66, and then probably 100. The way that they seem to play things out, which is pretty nice. Rule of threes, you have a 33.3% chance to fire 3 additional arcane missiles. Holy crap. I'm glad I got that right the first time around, because I usually suck at this crap. But yeah, 33% chance to fire 3 additional arcane missiles is pretty nice, because arcane missiles does a good amount of damage. Ethereal Sensitivity, rank 0 of 3. Spells have a 1% increased chance to activate arcane missiles, and that's going to be 1, 2, or 3%. Egwin's Ascendance, when evocation completes, it explodes for arcane damage equal to 12% of the mana it restored. So the lower that you are on it, the more damage you're going to do. Slow down. Slow applies to all enemies within 5 yards of your target. So it's just an AoE slowing ability now. Egwin's Wrath. Normally it would be 0 of 3. Increases critical strike chance by 1, 2, or 3%. Awesome. Crit's always nice. Arcane Rebound. When Arcane Barrage hits more than 2 targets, it explodes for 21,000 decent additional arcane damage to all enemies within 10 yards of the primary target. So it's just a little bit of extra AoE. Torrential Barrage, rank 0 of 3, increases damage dealt by Arcane Barrage by 3, 6, and I'm going to say 10%, because that's the way they have seemed to do most of their building on this stuff. Crackling Energy, rank 0-1, increases the radius of Arcane Explosion by 4 yards. Egwin's Fury, increases damage dealt by Arcane Missiles by 2, 4, or 6%. Touch of the Magi. Arcane Blast has a 7% chance to apply Touch of the Magi, accumulating 11% of the damage you deal to the target for 6 seconds, and then exploding for that amount of arcane damage to the target and all nearby enemies. So a good gameplay changer in this, to where more than likely when you see this, you're going to want to be capped out, hopefully, on your arcane charges and have a missiles ready, because that's where you're going to get a lot of additional damage put in. So you can get a bit of increased and semi-controlled damage. So it'll play out nice. It'll give you a little bit of a rotational difference. Everywhere at Once, rank 0-3, increases the window to activate displacement by 1 second and reduces the cooldown of displacement by 2 seconds. Basically, this is going to go 1, 2, and 3 seconds on displacement, and then more than likely 2, 4, and 6 on the cooldown itself. So the window, 1 to 3, cooldown, 2 to 6. And then we've got Arcane Purification. Increases damage dealt by Arcane Explosion by 3, 6, or 9%. So that's going to be it. This is going to be the artifact. Let's go ahead and move on to the gameplay though, guys. So here we are taking a look at the Arcane Mage. And one of the main things that I got to point out is the fact that this thing is not only strong single target, but it is strong in AoE as long as you've got something between you. If you're taking the hits, you're going to get crushed pretty quick. There's a lot of different gameplay choices on this thing, and in a dungeon situation like we are right now, in an AoE situation, you've got a couple different choices. You can either use your Mark of Aluneth, which is on a 1-minute cooldown, which is going to do AoE ticking damage, and then a huge explosion afterwards. It does a fairly good amount of damage depending on where your mastery is at. Because its explosion's done off of 15% of your maximum mana. So if you've got more mastery, you have more mana, and this thing's going to do more damage. The other thing you've got is Arcane Explosion baseline, and it's going to do a good ramping amount of damage also, allowing you to get those 4 charges, and you can either keep using Arcane Explosion, or you can blow everything off with Arcane Barrage and hit up to 5 targets. Really, it plays out nice in that situation, but you have to be up in the mix of the fight to actually use Arcane Explosion, and that's kind of always been the thing with Arcane Mages, of having to be in the fight. So in a single target rotation though, what are we looking at? Okay, same basic concept, right? Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. Okay, we're now at 4 arcane charges. Do we have any magic missiles? No? Alright, then we're gonna Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. You can actually spend more time at 4 charges on this compared to live, because there's no penalty of where your mana's at. As long as you've got a chance of, getting your mana back up, or you don't actually overspend completely. You can spend this at 15% mana quite comfortably, and if you've got enough mastery, you're going to regen fast enough, it's not going to matter. So where does this end up playing? Okay, you spend a hell of a lot of time hitting Arcane Blast. We know this already. You can use Arcane Barrage to clear those charges and do very little damage. It doesn't hit enough to actually end up using it for any other reason than to clear charges. So what you're doing is actually looking at proccing yourself up to right around 3. You can cap out your Arcane Missile charges at 3, just like on live. what are we looking at doing? You're looking at using Arcane Blast to fish for arcane missiles, or you can end up using abilities like Supernova or Mark of Alineth. A lot of different items will actually have a chance to proc your missiles, and your missiles are where your damage is going to lie. Once you get those missiles, you're going to want to end up using your cooldowns like Arcane Power. You can end up using Mirror Images just as a fire and forget in almost any situation, because they are their own entity and they do a base amount of damage to begin with. You still have Time Warp, which is going to be a good piece for increasing haste, and this is going to end up helping quite a bit on your damage, not just your damage, but your whole group's damage. So where do we lie? What is this? What are we looking at? Okay, Arcane Blast, main charge generator. You still get charges whenever you cast arcane missiles, but you want to try and save your arcane missiles for when you get up to 4 stacks of arcane charge. You want to get the most benefit out of this spell. It doesn't cost any mana to end up casting. It is channeled, and if you have a high enough mastery, you'll actually notice your mana regenerating quite quickly whenever you cast these. So don't be afraid to end up bringing yourself to about 50% mana, as long as you don't overcap your arcane missile charges. As long as you don't come to 3 of those and continue casting, you should always end up trying to keep yourself fairly balanced. Right around that 50% mark, though, is when you probably want to start using off those arcane missiles and then fishing for additional procs. Now, you can bring this all the way down to 0 mana, evocate, and then do it all over again, just to end up fishing for additional procs while you're at max charges, just to get the best benefit. But eventually this is going to end up running out, being the fact that evocate's on a 1.5 minute cooldown. You're really looking at getting the max benefit that you can. Again, this plays very well. You can end up playing it like you do on live, but you're going to lose a lot of additional damage that you can use with those additional 4 charges out of both Arcane Blast and proccing for new missiles and so on and so forth, as you would at sub 20% mana. 20% is probably where you want to end up actually playing this thing for your benefit, and then start going into the, build your 4 charges and then barrage. And if your mastery is high enough, you'll actually only have to do that once, maybe twice, before you actually end up being back towards the full mark of mana, and you can play back into that, burn it off, and do a shit ton of damage again. It's really feels like the same Arcane Mage, but it's different because you don't have that loss of control. Unless you end up taking the talent that, gives you a better chance to get missiles at a higher amount, then you can play it more safe that way. But this is more or less about, okay, spending all your time in that, as much time as possible, fully charged with the 4 charges of Arcane, or 4 Arcane charges. I keep saying 4 charges of Arcane. I feel like fucking Yoda. So with this, let's go ahead and just really push into the fact that if you're playing Arcane, you're not looking at this thing being like on live. You really do want to play in the lower ends of your mana, as long as you're spending most of your time on your mana spenders in that 4 arcane rage, or 4 arcane charge range shit. And then you can really end up getting a good play style out of this and get max benefit with the lower mana now, unlike on live where you had to keep your mana way up, or you would really end up seeing issues. It balances out fairly well compared to other specs, plays pretty decent, but it does get boring after a while, for the simple fact that a lot of the times, unless you're getting the procs really well, you're just spending it on Arcane Blast, and that's it. Now with Mark of Alineth, it's got some decent gameplay choices in there also. Obviously, this does not get affected by your arcane charges. The only things that get affected by your arcane charges are going to be your barrage, arcane explosion, arcane blast, and then your arcane missiles. So Mark of Alineth, what is this good for? This is good if you take erosion, start off the fight with this. It also ends up getting a little bit more empowered if you end up using it with arcane power. Helps out a ton there. But the main place that I would use this was the start of the fight in most situations, to help ramp up, because it does have a pretty fast tick that'll help stack up erosion stacks quite quickly on a single target fight, and then I would just use it every minute to end up getting that extra damage. It really it's a fire and forget every 1 minute to end up getting there, but it does help very much with building up stacks of erosion. So if you do know an ad's coming out, you can save this thing and automatically get up to that 8% real quick. With this, guys, let's go ahead and move on to the logs and see exactly where the damage is coming from. So here's the damage for King Deepbeard in the Eye of Ashara dungeon. And what you're looking at, it's a semi-mobile fight, but you can definitely see where the damage has its places. Arcane missiles, when timed right, you can end up getting a very good amount of damage out of each one. And again, I didn't pool very often, but when I did, you can see where the excess comes from. Mark of Aluneth, huge damage out of this ability whenever it's cast, and it gets some good placement. And again, this was also cast while it was under the effects of Arcane Power. Helps out a real good amount. And Arcane Blast, definitely your main filler. You've got your Arcane Missiles, all this stuff that you end up seeing here. But again, it's all about timing and where you want to end up being. Now, Arcane Blast, top damage. You can see the crits are pretty decent on damage, minimum and max, pretty solid. Damage wise, this is always going to be your main filler until Arcane Missiles ends up coming in. Now, it says 48 casts on there, but that's not really true. Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles hit 48 times. That's each individual wave. And it did a pretty solid amount of damage. Arcane Blast, again, this is going to be from mirror images. I still think they might be a little overtuned because of how long they end up lasting and how much damage they actually end up doing. But they got a total of 60 casts off, which is going to be 20 casts per image. And then you've got Mark of Aluneth. This thing really hits like a truck. More mastery, it's only going to be even more, but on a 1 minute cooldown, you can see how much damage this thing really does. And then you've got your critical hits that are coming in there. Pretty solid amount of damage. That's just your basic explosion at the end for each one. And then you've got the ticks here. 2 casts, 15 hits. The ticks themselves don't do a whole hell of a lot, but for 10% of your damage, a little over 10%, that's not bad for 2 casts. Supernova, again, this is just a talented ability. It does pretty good single target damage. As you can see, it was 6% of the overall damage. Felt good also just being able to have that one additional button to help proc for Arcane Missiles. And then you've got, again, the Arcane Assault. This is actually off of a set of gloves that you get from a quest. And then Arcane Barrage hits like a wet noodle. Not a whole hell of a lot there. I only cast it once because that was all I needed to reset in this 1 minute period. I was able to keep my mana up for the duration of the time, doing some pretty solid damage all the way through and through. So this is just a general here, guys. And again, if you enjoyed this, which is the main purpose for these videos, is to get a little education out there on the specs and also for the enjoyment. As always, thanks for watching.